government surveillance and police surveillance. So as part of this coalition, we're part of a lot of really other great organizations that protect Californians' civil rights, like the ACLU, CARE, Asian Americans Advancing Justice, and together we've worked to end harmful surveillance practice in California over the past decade. So the purpose of this session today is really we want to hear your thoughts, your experiences, your opinions on government surveillance and policing. How have you been affected by it? How have you heard other community members affected by it? What are your views on the way policing and surveillance is done in California? We also want to discuss how can we confront and how can we resolve these policing and surveillance issues we're seeing affecting our community, the Muslim community in California. We also want to provide the community with education on both the current issues that we're seeing in California pertaining to policing and surveillance, as well as how you can protect yourselves and what rights you have when approached by FBI or law enforcement or any type of government surveillance. So the roadmap for today. So first, we're going to have a Know Your Rights presentation by Kerala civil rights attorney Dina. Followed by that, it will be around 10 minutes with maybe 5 minutes question and answer. I'll then present shortly on kind of some of the current policing and surveillance issues we're seeing in California and how it's affected our local community here in Southern California. After that, we'll be breaking up into groups, women's group and maybe 1 or 2 men's group, where we'd really love to hear your guys' thoughts, your experiences. And this is really important because this will help shape California policy. We really want to get the Muslim community's thoughts and experiences so that it's reflected in state policy and so that it's there for the protection of our community. So we'll be doing that for around 30 minutes. We'll be coming back and just doing a conclusion and overview and hearing a little bit more from you. And then hopefully we'll be done in time for Aisha, inshallah. So with that, I'm going to pass it to our attorney, Dina.
Sorry? Sure. Okay, assalamu alaikum everyone. My name is Dina. I'm a civil rights attorney with CARE Los Angeles, and I want to talk to you all today about your rights when it comes to the FBI coming to your home, to your workplace, to your masjid, trying to talk to you. It's very important that you understand your rights. First, just a legal disclaimer, just so you understand that this material is for educational purposes. It's not meant to be direct legal advice. If you have a specific legal issue, you can always call us at this number and we can consult with you legally. But the transmission of this information doesn't form an attorney-client privilege. It's meant for educational purposes. So, know your rights with the FBI visits. The first thing I want you to know is that it's very important that you never, ever, ever talk to the FBI without an attorney, ever, okay? I understand that when people are approached by FBI agents or law enforcement in general, it's a really nerve-wracking experience. It's intimidating. And our instinct as law-abiding citizens is to show that we have nothing to hide, that we're good people, we're lawful, and we're afraid that if we don't engage in a conversation, we're gonna look guilty. But what I want you to understand are a few very important things. First, you have no obligation to talk to law enforcement ever, except for a few circumstances where you're identifying yourself, things like that. You have no obligation to engage in a voluntary conversation with law enforcement, whether it's state, local, or federal. And when you talk to the FBI, anything you say to them can and probably will be used against you. So have you ever seen TV shows where someone gets arrested and they put them in cuffs and then they say, you know, you have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you. You have the right to an attorney. If you're familiar with that, that applies to federal law enforcement as well. And that's because under the US Constitution, you have a constitutional right to remain silent and to invoke the Fifth Amendment, which gives you that right. So you don't say anything that can be incriminating, and you don't say anything that can get you in trouble, even if you think that what you're saying is completely innocent and innocuous and is not going to get you into trouble. So one thing FBI agents will never tell you is that if you misrepresent something to them, if you lie to them intentionally or unintentionally, that it's a federal crime. And it could be punishable by a fine or a jail sentence or both. Unfortunately, though, it's okay for them to lie to you. So if you think that you're going to get the truth out of the FBI agent, in my experience, the FBI very seldom will tell us exactly what they're investigating, exactly why they're questioning us. We really can't trust them to be honest to us. They don't have that obligation, but you have a legal obligation to be honest with them. So a lot of us in our daily life have a natural tendency to exaggerate, or when we're nervous, maybe we forget details, things like that. So just to give you an example, I had a client who was visited by the FBI suddenly one morning without notice, and the FBI asked him, "What are your plans this weekend?" So my client is nervous. He's a young guy. He doesn't want to tell the FBI what he's doing in his life. So he told the FBI agent, "Oh, not much. I don't have anything much going on." When in fact he planned to fly out with a group of his friends that weekend, but he didn't feel like he needed to reveal that information. Of course, the FBI agent, because he's an FBI agent, already knew that he had plans to fly. And so the FBI agent used that one statement, or actually that omission, to stop him when he was traveling and to seize his electronic devices, which to this day he has not gotten back. Potentially, if the FBI wants, they could try to charge him with a federal offense. So I just want you to understand that when you engage in these conversations, you think it's very innocent, but anything you say, or even if you fail to say something, you hold something back, and they know that you're not being completely forthcoming, it could be very dangerous for you. Yep, we're still there. No, you're way ahead of me. We're still here. We'll get through it. There's not that many slides. But so another thing you should know is that you have a constitutional right to have freedom of religion, freedom of speech, freedom of expression. So the FBI really is not constitutionally even permitted to try to obligate you to talk to them about your religious views, about your personal views, about your politics. So that's one thing I want you also to keep in mind. So other than remaining silent, the next thing you should know is that if an FBI agent ever approaches you, do not invite them into your private spaces. Don't invite them into your homes. Don't invite them into your car. Don't invite them into your office. Don't invite them into your masjid. And do you know why? Because they spy on us, okay? Because we know for a fact that the FBI leaves devices in our offices. They've done it to our offices at CARE. They've done it to our masjids. They've planted informants in our mosques, and later my colleague Lena will tell you about a case that our legal team is helping represent a few plaintiffs in Orange County that were spied on along with hundreds of other people by an FBI informant. So unless the FBI or any other law enforcement agency, by the way, this applies to police, to sheriff, etc., unless they have a specific warrant that specifies the place to be searched, you are not obligated to let them into your private spaces, and please don't ever do it, no matter how friendly they're being and how buddy-buddy they're talking to you and how innocent their visit seems. It's not innocent. They're there to collect information, and the goal of the FBI is to find people committing criminal conduct, okay? So if any agent, however, or officer forces their way into your home, I want you to prioritize your safety. So never fight back, never get violent, never get hostile. We know what law enforcement does when anybody tries to fight back. So don't do it. But always assert your right verbally that I do not consent to this search. I do not consent to you entering my space, okay? The third thing I want you to remember is ask for identification. So although I said remain silent, before you remain silent, ask them to identify themselves before they leave. Ask for a card. If they don't want to give you a card, ask for their name, ask for what field office they're working out of, what their number or what their email address is. And the reason for that is when you contact an attorney afterwards, it helps us figure out who was the one visiting you so we can represent you and make sure to get them off your back so they don't bother you again. And the last thing, consult an attorney, okay? You always have the right to legal representation and assistance when it comes to law enforcement. You always have the right to consult an attorney. And of course, at CARE, you can go to any attorney, it doesn't have to be CARE, but at CARE, we mostly provide our services free of charge. When someone comes to us and they've been approached by law enforcement or FBI, and they need an attorney to step in and represent them, we'll be able to do that for you free of charge. So make sure you reach out to any attorney or us at CARE. All right, so a lot of people ask, like, why are they approaching me? Why are they interested in me? One of the biggest reasons they do that is because they're profiling and mapping Muslim communities. And so the history of national intelligence in our country, the NSA, the FBI, the CIA, they were created to spy on citizens, okay? They have a really terrible, terrible, traumatic history of spying on Black and brown minorities, on political groups, on civil rights advocates, on Malcolm X, Martin Luther King. A lot of you probably already know this. The Muslim community is no exception, and we know after 9/11 specifically, they stepped up their efforts to spy on us, surveil us. And now what law enforcement has started doing since 9/11 is they create maps of our communities. So they want to know, where do Muslims go to pray? Where are they going to school? Who is the Imam of the Hawthorne Islamic Center? Who is the Muslim leader they're looking to? Who is the person doing charitable work? They want to know all that information, and they keep this list, and then they harass these people to try to find any type of conduct that they can charge. So that's one of the reasons they may be going door to door, is they're trying to get information on our communities. Another reason they may be approaching you, especially if you're being approached more than once, is that you're talking to them. So you're now seen as a source of information. A lot of people think, if I just answer this agent's questions, he or she is gonna leave me alone. That's often not the case. They often feel like, okay, now you're a source of information, this person's gonna talk to me, I'm gonna keep talking to them. And once you talk, you'll talk again, and maybe they even want you to become an informant. The third thing is they might be following a tip. The fourth, they may want information for an investigation that doesn't concern you. I would say, honestly, in probably 90 to 95% of the cases that I handle, once the FBI knows that an attorney is involved, they will stop bothering you. And then lastly, in the very, very rare event that the FBI is actually investigating you, then it's even more important that you don't talk to them, right? Because if you're under criminal investigation, you better not be talking to any law enforcement or FBI. You need to talk to an attorney. So under any scenario that I've talked about, the best thing to do is don't talk to the FBI. Okay, general advice. Law enforcement can't typically search your phone or electronic devices without a warrant unless you give them permission. Don't ever give them permission, okay? Unless you're under arrest, you're always free to walk away. Always ask the agent, am I being placed under arrest? If not, I'm going to walk away. You can ask them to leave your private property if they're at your home, your workplace, etc. If you're under arrest, officers then have to read you that Miranda warning I said earlier. You have the right to remain silent, etc., etc. And then you should always say, I'm invoking my right to remain silent, and I would like an attorney. Don't argue, don't run away, even if what you feel is happening is wrong, because I want you to prioritize your safety. And you have the right to record law enforcement in public spaces as long as you're not interfering with or obstructing their work. General advice for travel. We often get people who are stopped when they travel who, I don't know if any of you have ever seen 4 S's on your boarding pass, those quad S's. I don't know if any of you are pulled out of line and searched again. You know, when everyone else is going through the line, you're chosen for random screenings. They're not really that random. Things to keep in mind when you're traveling, especially out of country. So Customs and Border Protection can question you about your citizenship and your identity, right? To identify who you are, if you're a US citizen, or what your citizenship status is, the purpose of your travel, and any items you've brought back. And they generally have authority to search any person or anything coming in with you. Although states differ when it comes to electronic devices. So the laws differ depending on jurisdiction. Like California is different than Maryland, is different than, you know, Texas, etc. Generally, they can't force you to give them passwords to your electronic devices. That's why I recommend right now, if you're using a fingerprint to unlock, like if you still have the iPhone 8 or whatever, don't use a fingerprint. Change it to a passcode. Because there is differentiation in the law that they could potentially force you to unlock a device with your fingerprint, but they can't force you to give up information, right? Because you have the right to remain silent. So change it to passcodes or passwords if it's your laptop, your iPad, your phone. If you don't want to unlock your device, just be prepared that it could potentially cause your detention or questioning to be longer. But I would rather not volunteer any information and be questioned or held back for an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, instead of volunteering my information to the federal government. But of course, this is a personal thing that everyone has to decide for themselves. And if you don't choose to give them your devices, they may seize them, but we can try to challenge that if it happens. So I personally would recommend not to volunteer information. All right, if you're a US citizen, you have an unqualified right to re-enter the borders. So they can't retaliate against you for refusing to provide them passcodes to your devices. They have to allow you to re-enter the borders always, okay? If you hold a green card, you also should be admitted into the country unless you have violated the terms of your green card or you don't have a valid green card. And if you don't have permanent status, unfortunately, you can be refused right of entry for almost any reason whatsoever, and that's an unfortunate circumstance. And then the last thing I would say when you're traveling, don't ever sign anything without consulting an attorney, because we don't want anyone to be giving up any of their legal rights at the border without understanding what they are signing away. And then for immigrants, for people who have immigrated here and are afraid about being questioned about their identity when they're out on the street or by law enforcement, stopping them for a traffic violation, etc., you also have the right to remain silent. You don't have to discuss your citizenship with law enforcement, police, any other official. You don't have to answer questions about where you were born, whether you're a citizen, or when or how you entered the country. And you're not required to present your immigration papers to an immigration officer. I'm sorry, you are required to present your immigration papers if it's an immigration officer that's asking you, but not a police officer. Okay, there's a difference. And lastly, do not lie. Don't ever lie to law enforcement. It is not a good idea. Don't ever lie about your immigration status, you know, but you can choose not to say anything is the smartest thing to do. So remember, remain silent. Do not talk to law enforcement other than to ask them to identify themselves. Ask for identification. Don't let agents or law enforcement into your private spaces without a search warrant. And you always have to ask to see a search warrant if they say that they have one. Ask them to slip it under the door. Don't even open the door. And then inform an attorney and contact organizations like CARE because we can help, okay? That's the end of my presentation. It's up to you. Yeah, I can take maybe 1 or 2 questions now, or we can save it to the end and keep it all together. Sure. Walaikum assalam. Yeah, of course. Yeah. The 714-776-1177. For civil rights, it's option number 2. For immigration, because we do provide assistance with some immigration services, it's option number 1. And if you have a specific fact pattern, if you've been visited by the FBI, contact an attorney right away. If you're having a lot of trouble traveling, contact us. We can help you with that. If it has to do with your civil rights, so if you're facing a specific harm because of your religion, your national origin, your ethnicity, that's the legal scope that we handle. If it's an issue that falls within that legal scope, we can probably help you. And if it falls outside of our legal scope, we will always do our best to refer you to an attorney or organization that handles that type of law. Yes?
First of all, like, you see the advertisement coming out from the CDP and the FBI employment. Now, as a Muslim and as a member of care in the community, what would you recommend us if we want to work for FBI? Obviously, we're not profiling everybody. What is your recommendation for that?
I don't think I can give you a recommendation, honestly. I think it's a very personal decision, right? It has a lot to do with your, you know, the role that you're going to be playing. First of all, the job that you're going to be doing. Not every government job is harmful to communities. I think you just have to be aware of the harm that some federal agencies have inflicted on the Muslim community, on communities of color, on minority communities, how they continue to really profile our community. And I think it's a very personal decision. And I don't think I can give you specific advice other than to say just be really well aware of the track history of these agencies and make the best decision that's right for you, your family, your morals, your values, your religious principles. And, you know, it's up to you. May Allah guide us all to the best path. Okay, well, we're going to save any other questions to the end. And again, that's the number to my department. Feel free to jot it down and call us if you need help. Yeah, of course, sorry.
Okay, thank you so much, Dina, for that Know Your Rights presentation. Now we want to move into the listening portion and the discussion portion. First, I'll just briefly give some background to kind of guide our conversation, give you some background on the issues we're seeing now on government surveillance and policing of the Muslim community and other targeted communities. But just to lay out some ground rules is in these discussion groups, your responses will be completely anonymous unless you choose to release them to us, unless you explicitly come to us afterwards and say, I don't mind if you identify me or I want to share more. We're going to be taking notes during our discussion groups, but again, this will be completely anonymous. And we won't be taking any videos or photos or audio recording. The purpose of this discussion is, like I said, it's to hear your thoughts and your opinions and your stories and experiences dealing with police and surveillance in your community. And with that, we really hope to reflect that in policy next year and in moving forward to make sure that California state policy is protecting the Muslim community instead of targeting us. So it's just, we're here to hear from you. So I'm just shortly gonna go over a quick background and then we'll break into the discussion groups, inshallah. So as Dina went over, we've seen how FBI, which is a federal law enforcement agencies, have and can target and surveil the Muslim communities and how they have done it. And I'm sure many of us have experienced or hear about how local police officers have also targeted certain communities of color, mostly brown and black communities, different neighborhoods, etc. But there is something else that I think less people know about that is an issue in California and across the country, but it's something we've seen over the past year specifically affecting the Muslim community here in California. And that is local and federal law enforcement partnerships. So what these are is a collaboration between local and federal law enforcement agencies. So for example, a federal agency would be the FBI, the Department of Homeland Security, Border Patrol, ICE, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, and they collaborate and have official partnerships with local police officers. So that would be like your local police department, your local sheriff department, or state police. And how they operate is that the local police are then placed under the control of the federal government and of FBI agents, and they follow now federal law instead of state law. There's not much known about these local and federal partnerships. They're highly secretive, but what we do know is they expand police power by giving local and state police the same policing power as federal authorities like the FBI. We know they use surveillance, and we know that because they fall under federal law, there's little to no control by local law and state law in California over them. So a specific type of local and federal law enforcement partnership that we see and is prevalent in California are what's known as Joint Terrorism Task Forces, or JTTFs. These task forces are led by the Department of Justice and the FBI, and they're tasked with investigating terrorist threats. So we know that these task forces have been instrumental in helping carry out surveillance of the Muslim and Imams community under the guise of national security. So how this partnership works is the federal agencies like the FBI or Department of Justice or DHS will provide training, resources, and coordination for local law enforcement. So again, to your local sheriff departments, the LAPD, the Highway Patrol, etc. And as a result, these local police officers or state police officers are sworn in and given the power of federal agents. And their tasks, now they're able to carry out investigations and operations into terrorist threats. And again, these are shrouded in secrecy. We don't really know how their structure is, who's part of it, what different law enforcement agencies are part of it. And what we do know is there are about 200 of these task forces across the country, including in California. So to give you more detail about JTTFs, so when state and local law enforcement officers are participating in JTTFs, they're deputized as federal agents. So they're given the same power to investigate as federal agents. And federal agents have very broad and almost unlimited power to investigate and police. For example, they don't need to have proof or evidence of wrongdoing or that you committed a crime. They're able to instead base their investigations and surveillance on vague reasons. They don't have to have proof that you committed something wrong or that you are doing wrongdoing to investigate. So as a result, it allows local law enforcement, like your local police department, to now have that same power. Whereas within California and within LA possibly, we have stricter laws that say you can't do this. You have to have probable cause. You have to have evidence of a crime being committed or been committed to open investigation. Now your local police department, as part of JTTFs, can ignore the local and state laws and open up investigations with the same authority as the FBI. So as a result, there's fewer protections for your civil liberties, for your privacy rights, for your right to free speech, than the rules governing local law enforcement in California. So many of the tactics that are used by the FBI would otherwise be illegal for local police to use in California, but because they're part of JTTFs, they can now use those tactics. And some of those tactics are sending informants, having interviews under false pretense, and as I mentioned, surveillance without proof of criminal activity. So as Dina mentioned, we know what communities have been targeted by FBI, law enforcement, Department of Homeland Security. There's a long history of it in this country. So of course, once you combine FBI and federal law enforcement working with your local police, it's an issue and it's something of concern. Throughout the past few decades, we know who the FBI has historically surveilled are Black civil rights organizations. Dina mentioned Martin Luther King Jr., Malcolm X, and increasingly after 9/11, Muslim organizations, Muslim communities, masjids across California and across the US. Also activists engaged in other types of protests as well, and other minority communities, so Black and brown communities in the US, and also ICE. We know ICE has targeted our immigrant communities, and all these federal agencies can and are usually part of these JTTF, so they have a long history of targeting our communities. So to kind of bring it to home and show how it's affected us very locally here in Southern California, some of you might be familiar with the case Fizaga versus FBI. And this is the case, as Dina mentioned, that CARE is working on with several partners related to surveillance in Southern California. So to give you a brief overview, between 2006 and 2007, the FBI unlawfully targeted the Southern California Muslim community for surveillance based solely on their religion. So this was part of an FBI operation called Operation Flex. And what they did was they paid an informant, Craig Monte, to infiltrate Southern California masjids to spy on the Muslim community as part of a counterterrorism investigation. And what the kind of direction of the FBI was for this informant was to target the Muslim community at large, just those who are practicing, not necessarily anyone is participating in criminal activity, but just at large the Muslim community and those that practice Islam in Southern California. So over a 14-month period, this informant was attending masjids and community events, and he collected, hundreds and thousands of personal information like email, background on the Muslim community, including, and he also recorded these and provided it to the FBI. And again, this is on innocent Muslims. And it came to the point where his behavior became concerning and that he was kind of instigating people, trying to get them to talk about terrorism and their support for violence. So concerned community members reported him to the FBI. And of course, the FBI did nothing at the time because he was their informant. They knew exactly what he was doing. And only later did it come out that he was indeed an informant for the FBI and that he had gathered all this information for 14 months on the community, all while the FBI was promising the Muslim community here that they were not being spied on. And this led to the lawsuit that CARE is a part of, where Sheikh Fizaga and two congregants of the masjids that the informant attended sued the government, the FBI, and it made its way all the way to the Supreme Court, and it's still in litigation now. So with that story, it really just shows how this isn't some faraway threat or faraway situation or something out of a movie. This is something that has affected the community here, and I'm sure many of you are aware of this as well. So with that background, I would like to break us up into some groups to kind of get your thoughts on law enforcement, on the FBI, on these joint terrorism task forces, and to share any stories and experiences you might have. And again, just reiterating, this is a safe space. It's anonymous, and we'll just be using this information to help shape our policy to make sure it's representative of our community. So Dina, how many groups, Alia, if you can come up and let us know how we want to split up, and we'll spend about 30 minutes in the discussion group, and then we'll come back and do a conclusion and provide you with a little bit more information. And if anybody has questions for Dina regarding the Know Your Rights, there's an opportunity for that as well. So if you can just give us one moment to figure out the discussion groups. Okay, if we could have, we'll have one discussion group in the women's section, and there'll be someone from CARE who will kind of help guide the conversation. And if we can split into two groups in the men's section, maybe around 10 people each, if those on one corner of the room want to gather up near the door and gather up another group near this front door. If you want to sit in on any or anything like that, okay, see what's going on. And we'll
Yeah, I mean, all countries, they share, like, in the United States, we have a lot of people like snow flyers, people who can fly, but they have to be subjected to secondary screening, you know, more search, more questions, people who can't fly at all, and then a lot of these countries, they share this. Of course, so you have a right to come back. You can't stop people from coming back, but they do that to intimidate you so that when you come back to the US and they're questioning you, you're going to be intimidated and scared, or maybe you're going to be scared there to talk to them, to give them information. I know, but not, I mean, it's an intimidating experience, right? For normal people, it's they came to your house. Oh, yeah. Of course. Of course. Alhamdulillah, but I definitely wouldn't recommend you to that again. Oh yeah, of course, yeah, everywhere. Everywhere. And they work with the colleges, they're Egyptian, so they work with, they call it out in Australia, they work with them, right? They share information, and yeah. And a lot of times the government does that to pressure you to talk to them. And I'm afraid. They call her وحضرتك شديد الخوف المنوفية يعني شرفت حضرتك إمام الجامعة شرفت ما شاء الله ما شاء الله شرفت
But that's it. Well, actually, that's not on this one. Yeah.
فتحت ستريم عملت تطفيها هلا؟ اوكي نقدر لما ابي انت شوي نأذن يا دكتور جودة ولا نستنى؟ قول نأذن ولا نستنى؟ اسألهم. عايزين نسمعك خد الكردس الكردس عندك هاي اون
بسم الله. الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمدًا رسول الله أشهد أن محمدًا رسول الله حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله.
La ilaha illallah. Just inshallah sit down, inshallah. They're going to wrap up in 5 minutes, inshallah, just to take the conclusion out of this discussion, inshallah, so that everyone will benefit from it. And after that, we're going to have pizza, courtesy from Kir, inshallah. Jazakumullah. After Isha. No chai today, inshallah. Next time.
Assalamu alaikum again, everyone. I really want to thank you guys so much for sharing your stories and your thoughts on this important issue of government surveillance in policing. I know just in the group I was in, hearing your opinions and experiences is very important, and this is, inshallah, what's going to help us, like I said, change things at a policy level in California. So I kind of want to briefly go over what the coalition, the MEMSA coalition that CARE is a part of, what we're hoping to do to tackle this issue of government surveillance and specifically JTTFs. So over the past few years, the coalition has been successful in ending JTTFs in places like San Francisco and Oakland, where the local police actually withdrew from these partnerships and are no longer working with it. And that was as a result of the coalition and hearing community voices like your own, speaking to city council members, speaking to officials, and saying why surveillance is an issue. With that, we are hoping to do this at the state level. While, like I said, San Francisco and Oakland may have ended it, it still exists at the state level, and there is not any state oversight over these task forces. So we want to try proposing a bill in 2024 with the purpose of, one, bring light to the harm of task forces on the Muslim community and other affected community to California lawmakers. We want this to be a conversation and an issue that they are hearing about and that they know affect us. We also want to work towards passing a bill that would provide transparency of where task forces are working, how they're working, would provide state oversight over them, saying you need to follow state law, not federal law, and also having more transparency about how they operate. So with that, I want to thank you all for joining, and these stories and experience you shared is what's going to help, inshallah, shape this work that we do in the next coming months and year. And I want to open it up if anybody wants to share any more information, become more involved, share their stories in more detail, to please reach out. And Dina, our civil rights attorney, has her card to pass out, and we'll be outside for a few minutes if anyone has questions or if you want to connect with us further. But thank you everyone so much.